A white crystal measuring less than 3 millimeters across is currently dismantling the social architecture of the Middle East. It requires no state budgets, heavy armor, or foreign military alliances to penetrate international borders. This substance easily bypasses a regional security apparatus that cost Gulf governments over $100 billion to construct and maintain. For more than 12 years, defense ministries from Amman to Riyadh calculated security risks based on a centralized threat they believed they understood. They built concrete walls, deployed thermal optics, and trained elite border units to intercept a specific product coming from a known state origin. While their eyes were fixed on that single geographic point, the entire system fractured from within. To understand the scale of this systemic failure, the perspective must shift back to the decade preceding the winter of 2024. For more than 10 years, the illicit economy of the Near East operated on a predictable, highly centralized axis. That axis was defined by a single, round synthetic tablet stamped with a double crescent logo known as Captagon. Between 2014 and late 2024, the production of this amphetamine-type stimulant was not a back-alley operation hidden in criminal safehouses. It functioned as a macroeconomic lifeline executed at an industrial scale, utilizing the full logistical power of a sovereign nation. The geography of this multi-billion-dollar trade had one primary center of mass: the Syrian Arab Republic, under the pressure of comprehensive Western economic sanctions. The Syrian regime systematically converted its surviving industrial infrastructure into a state-run narcotics enterprise. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime later confirmed the exact parameters of this system. Between January of 2019 and November of 2025, data compiled from regional law enforcement indicated that roughly 80% of all Captagon seizures across the Middle East traced directly back to Syrian territory. This was not a loose affiliation of criminal actors, but a top-down military operation. The 4th Armored Division, an elite formation commanded by Maher al-Assad, the brother of the president, directly oversaw the entire logistical chain. The volume of capital generated by this military-industrial complex was unprecedented for an illicit network. Conservative international estimates placed the annual revenue of the Syrian Captagon trade somewhere between $5.7 billion and $30 billion. To understand the disruptive power of that figure, it must be compared directly to the legitimate economic output of the nation. $30 billion represented nearly 3 times the entire estimated gross domestic product of Syria during those years. The regime did not view this chemical asset as a criminal sideline, but as a primary mechanism of survival. These funds paid the salaries of state militias, financed essential imports, and served as a powerful geopolitical lever against neighboring Gulf states for the recipient nations across the Arabian Peninsula. This synthetic influx redefined the nature of border defense. The entire security architecture of the region reorganized its assets around the containment of this single pill. Saudi Arabian customs officers re-engineered their port inspection protocols, uncovering millions of tablets concealed within commercial shipments of pomegranates, industrial machinery, and fruit juice cartons. On the northern frontier, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan found itself locked in an escalating low-intensity conflict. The Jordanian military deployed heavy armor and elite infantry units along its desert borders to engage in lethal firefights with smuggling syndicates moving under the cover of winter sandstorms. This massive defensive investment operated on a fundamental structural assumption. It assumed that as long as the source of the chemical threat remained tied to a centralized state regime, the problem could be managed through physical interdiction and diplomatic leverage. Regional capitals explicitly offered political normalization to Damascus in exchange for a verifiable reduction in the flow of drugs. The threat possessed a known address, a visible command hierarchy, and an identifiable manufacturing footprint that could be monitored by satellite reconnaissance. The machinery of interdiction knew exactly what it was looking at, because the adversary operated like a traditional industrial state. That entire geopolitical equation dissolved in less than 48 hours. On the morning of December 8, 2024, an aircraft carrying Bashar al-Assad departed Damascus for asylum in Russia, marking the immediate end of the half-century rule of the Assad family. The capital fell to a lightning military offensive led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and its commander, Ahmed al-Shara, who would be declared the nation's transitional president just 6 weeks later. The international community focused its attention exclusively on the political transition and the rewriting of diplomatic maps. But a far more volatile transformation was occurring entirely unmonitored within the physical infrastructure of the Syrian industrial drug complex. The collapse of the regime did not cause the industrial drug apparatus to vanish. It caused it to scatter. The specialized pill presses, the warehouse networks, the massive stockpiles of chemical precursors, and the technical records suddenly lost the centralized authority that protected them. The entire operational directory, containing the names and phone numbers of major distributors across Beirut, Basra, and Bahrain, was suddenly uncoupled from state control. When military intelligence officers abandoned their command posts, this highly sophisticated infrastructure fell into the immediate possession of local militia commanders, regional warlords, and fragmented tribal factions. The new transitional authorities in Damascus attempted to demonstrate control by dismantling 15 industrial laboratories and 13 storage facilities over the following year. However, these operations only cleared the static remnants of the old era. The destruction of centralized factories did not eliminate the networks. It forced an immediate and drastic evolutionary pivot. The chemists and logistics managers who found themselves unemployed possessed decades of advanced manufacturing expertise and no legitimate economic alternatives. The centralized corridors formerly managed by military intelligence instantly fractured into hundreds of autonomous pipelines. The physical architecture of containment remained intact, completely blind to the fact that the entire regional market was already transitioning into something far more volatile. A single 12-kilogram suitcase of high-purity methamphetamine yields the exact same profit margin as a 2-ton commercial cargo shipment of Captagon tablets. This mathematical reality has rendered thousands of miles of concrete border walls, thermal cameras, and military watchposts functionally obsolete. The collapse of the centralized Syrian drug state did not stop the flow of narcotics. It initiated an uncontrolled chemical fission. When the administrative framework of the Assad regime disintegrated in December of 2024, it triggered a chain reaction that dismantled the economic logic of the regional drug trade. The primary mechanism of this collapse was an immediate, severe liquidity crisis among the armed factions that inherited the state warehouses to secure immediate operational capital. Localized militias and fragmented military units dumped tens of millions of hoarded Captagon tablets onto the regional black market simultaneously. This sudden, uncoordinated surge in volume overinflated the supply chain and caused a catastrophic price collapse. By the early months of 2025, the street value of a standard Syrian-manufactured Captagon pill plummeted by 95%, dropping from $20 down to less than 75 cents in the markets of the Arabian Peninsula. Armed groups could no longer finance their operations or pay their fighters using a product that required massive physical volume to generate diminishing financial returns. The traditional business model of regional drug trafficking became economically unviable overnight. Faced with bankruptcy, criminal networks and independent military commanders abandoned the bulky, low-margin tablets and pivoted toward a substance that packed 1,000 times more economic energy into the same physical space. That substance was crystal methamphetamine, This transition eliminated the primary vulnerability that regional intelligence services had previously exploited: the reliance on industrial supply chains. Captagon manufacturing required heavy machinery and highly restricted pharmaceutical precursor chemicals like phenylacetic acid, which had to be diverted from state-monitored maritime ports. Methamphetamine required no such bureaucratic infrastructure. Technical managers quickly realized that the manufacturing process could be decentralized and fueled by unregulated raw inputs. The rapid adaptation of traffickers turned a defensive victory for regional governments into an offensive trap. Throughout 2025, Gulf customs agencies reported record-breaking volumes of Captagon seizures, celebrating these metrics as proof of successful border containment. This was a critical miscalculation. The high interception rates did not indicate that the trade was dying. They signaled that syndicates were using bulk Captagon shipments as cheap, sacrificial decoys. Smugglers intentionally leaked coordinates of large pill shipments to border guards to saturate law enforcement resources at specific checkpoints, while security forces spent hours cataloging millions of worthless tablets, high-value, low-volume packages of crystal meth slipped through unmonitored sectors of the frontier. Tighter physical interdiction along the land borders of Jordan and Iraq accelerated the ultimate structural mutation of the trade. Instead of suppressing the market, the external pressure forced international syndicates to stop exporting finished chemical products and start exporting raw materials and technical blueprints instead. The industrial drug empire permanently transformed into a decentralized, open-source franchise model. By late 2025, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime identified that manufacturing had migrated directly inside the destination countries. A clandestine laboratory no longer required a multi-acre industrial compound visible to military satellites. It required only a standard two-bedroom residential apartment, basic laboratory glassware, and standard commercial ventilation. This spatial shift completely paralyzed security forces designed to intercept maritime containers and desert convoys. Law enforcement agencies continued to measure success through the physical weight of seizures, while the actual threat shifted to micro-batches produced deep within their own urban centers. In urban districts of Kuwait City, Riyadh, and Dubai, police units conducting routine raids discovered fully operational kitchen labs hidden in ordinary apartment complexes. The electrical and chemical footprints of these operations matched standard household utility consumption, making them invisible to automated digital monitoring systems. When authorities successfully closed one apartment lab, the low capital requirement allowed syndicates to establish 3 replacement units in adjacent neighborhoods within 48 hours. The internal economics of these localized operations created a self-sustaining loop that accelerated independent of external market conditions. A single successful chemical cook using basic inputs could generate a 3,000% return on investment in less than 2 days. This immense profit margin allowed local distributors to absorb law enforcement losses as a minor operational tax rather than a deterrent. The hyper-profitability of domestic crystal meth production instantly collided with a highly vulnerable regional labor market. The economic stagnation of the broader Middle East provided an inexhaustible supply of couriers, lookouts, and micro-dealers among underemployed. By the spring of 2026, this structural transformation reached its terminal phase. Passing the point of no return, the old state-sponsored monopoly was entirely gone, replaced by an invisible, self-replicating network that traditional intelligence mapping could no longer track. The regional security apparatus remained oriented outward, heavily investing in the defense of external frontiers, while the actual chemical machinery of the crisis was already operating deep inside the interior of their own cities. The system built to fight a centralized state enterprise proved completely incapable of containing a decentralized ghost economy that reproduces itself faster than it can be monitored. The geopolitical landscape of the Middle East in June of 2026 is defined by a complete decoupling of threat from territory. The collapse of the Syrian drug monopoly did not create a vacuum. It permanently shifted capital to the lawless frontiers of Southwest Asia. Wealth now concentrates within the tri-border region of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran, specifically inside Balochistan, where state authority lacks the physical infrastructure to project power. The trade operates through fluid, hyper-flexible syndicates that utilize Western Europe and North Africa as staging grounds before looping back into the Gulf. This spatial rearrangement means that a military victory inside Syria has zero impact on the volume of chemicals reaching the consumer. The response from regional governments remains fundamentally reactive. Relying on legislative tools designed for a previous century, ministries of interior across the Gulf have escalated punitive measures, increasing the frequency of capital punishment for trafficking and launching state-funded media campaigns warning against substance abuse. Executing low-level couriers does not disrupt the financial architecture of the ghost economy. It merely increases the operational premium for risk, driving retail street prices higher. Higher prices attract more sophisticated criminal networks possessing the capital to deploy unmanned aerial vehicles, commercial drones, and automated GPS-guided balloons across international airspace. The June 2026 data on the Arab synthetic drug market confirms that these aerial and maritime routes are expanding faster than the defensive hardware can be deployed. This enforcement failure directly drives the compounding crisis within the domestic architecture of the Gulf states, where public health systems face an unprecedented category of clinical collapse. The cultural enforcement of social honor, or sharaf, operates as a primary structural accelerator for the epidemic. By prioritizing total family concealment over early clinical intervention, families inadvertently function as incubators for the drug's transmission. A daughter or son remains hidden in a residential basement until the neurotoxic damage triggers a permanent psychotic break, transforming a treatable medical condition into a permanent social and economic liability. The clinical reality inside Saudi Arabia's Irada mental and addiction centers exposes the lethal consequence of this delayed intervention, where the majority of users entering the system have already sustained irreversible cognitive damage. The structural mechanics of the rehabilitation system itself reveal why containment is failing. Overall 6-month retention within these specialized treatment centers sits at a critical low of just 28%. For the small minority who manage to complete the full rehabilitation program, the 6-month relapse rate drops to 14%, whereas those who drop out face a 29% relapse rate. The problem is not the medical efficacy of the detox protocol. The problem is the absolute lack of an economic or social infrastructure capable of absorbing a recovering addict back into civil society. This is where the cycle locks into place, creating a perfect closed loop of re-addiction. In the United Arab Emirates, research on social stigma demonstrates that recovered users face a 23% higher job loss rate than their comparable peers, even after successful medical clearance. When a conservative society systematically denies employment, housing, and marriage prospects to a rehabilitated individual, it strips them of any legitimate path toward reintegration. This total economic and social isolation leaves the individual with exactly one community that will accept them without judgment: the active network of users they just left. The high relapse rates are not a failure of individual will. They are a direct consequence of a social architecture that treats addiction as an unforgivable stain rather than a manageable pathology. This structural vulnerability is further exploited by a deliberate mutation in the ideological domain. The emergence of fringe theological arguments in distant transit hubs, such as the low-level rulings in Indonesia claiming methamphetamine accelerates spiritual focus for prayer, demonstrates the hyper-adaptability of the trade. While central religious authorities in Cairo and Riyadh issue unequivocal decrees classifying the substance as strictly forbidden under the principles of protecting the intellect and preventing harm. These institutional pronouncements struggle to compete with decentralized digital networks. Traffickers systematically weaponize these fringe justifications through encrypted messaging networks, targeting underemployed, isolated young men who are looking for purpose in stagnant economic systems. The transition from a state-managed Captagon monopoly to a borderless, decentralized crystal methamphetamine economy represents a structural mutation of the regional social fabric that cannot be reversed by administrative decree or military force. The ghost economy does not lose when security forces execute a record-breaking multi-million-dollar seizure. It treats those losses as a minor operational tax, easily absorbed by the immense profit margins of the remaining shipments. The crisis no longer relies on the survival of a specific regime, the stability of a single border, or the availability of specialized industrial chemical factories. It feeds directly on the internal contradictions of the societies it infects, the economic stagnation of its youth, the systemic silence of its families, and the rigid architecture